That's Mr. Rajendra Gupta, Economic and Political Strategies, Healthcare. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to introduce the panel as well. We have with us Dr. Pillai, DDG SA. We also have with us Mr. Shivinder Mohan Singh, Vice Chairman, Fortis. I'd like to welcome Dr. Sanjeev K. Chaudhary, MD, SRL. I'd also like to welcome Ms. Sangeeta Reddy, Joint Managing Director, Apollo Hospitals. Ms. Amira Shah, MD, Metropolis. Thank you for joining us. I'd also like to welcome Mr. A. Vaidish, Vice President, Corporate Governance Affairs, Asian Pacific, member of Global Leadership Team, J&J. I'd like to welcome Mr. Arvind Kumar, Principal Secretary, Health, Government of Uttar Pradesh. We have with us Dr. Naresh Trehan, MD, Medanta. Dr. Ashok Agarwal, Trustee, Indian Institute of Health Management and Research, and Johns Hopkins University, USA. I'd also like to welcome Mr. Nikunj Biharidhal, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. And I'd like to request our chair to please take things forward.
In this panel, what I'm going to do is, we are going to touch on every issue across the continuum of care with all stakeholders possible around this table and ask them their inputs, which will be compiled by ET and sent to the policymakers. And as our ministers have said, they're going to take it very seriously. We hope so. It will happen. So let me not put more time giving an overview, and let me start straight with a question to Mr. Pillai. Mr. Pillai, as you know that we have embarked on the journey of universal health coverage, and we are talking of right to health as something that is justiciable in the near future. Now, given the fact that India is a low middle income country as per WHO, do you think it's possible? That's point one. Next 5 years, 10 years. And what are the 3 to 5 key action areas you would give as an input to policymakers for the right to health?
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. So, South Africa's embarked on this UHC policy as well, and we've made some significant progress in this direction. So maybe I should say a little bit about UHC. UHC, by definition, suggests that every citizen has social protection against healthcare costs that's affordable. And one can achieve this in two ways. The first approach is to finance this through a central financing mechanism where government plays a key role. All funds are then pooled, and citizens have access to healthcare, and government funds the cost of that healthcare centrally. The second approach is what's referred to as a social health insurance approach. And in a social health insurance approach, one would take a more conservative approach, identify those members of the population that are most vulnerable to healthcare costs and give them social protection, and say to those who are above a certain income bracket, you finance your healthcare through some private insurance and you will get a tax break for that. And so that would be the second approach. We have taken the second approach in South Africa for many years and have experienced challenges around it, largely because when you have a very strong private healthcare system and a public healthcare system running in parallel, you can have challenges within the public healthcare system because the two systems can sometimes compete. So in setting up these two systems, it's important to make sure there's no competition between them, because one can destabilize the other, and it's not in the best interest of the country that patients are left without health care in either system because of those kinds of challenges. So I think the 5 areas that one, or 6 areas that one should look at in terms of setting up the UHC system is firstly around governance and leadership. And I think here at a political level it needs very strong commitment, because when you're dealing with universal health coverage, it's a program that must be driven politically. It can't be driven at a lower level, and it requires the combined effort of all parties within Parliament, etc., to be able to do. Secondly, I think that the leadership within the ministry needs to be very clear about what it is it wants to achieve at the end of a universal health coverage program. I think the Prime Minister yesterday was very clear that when you embark on programs, you need to know what is it that you want to do at the end of it. And I think that's important. And defining the problem in India would be helpful so that you understand what it is that you want to achieve. In terms of the service delivery platform, I think that's often defined in the universal health coverage environment based on what currently obtains in each country. So The universal health coverage in the UK will be very different from what it is in the US or in India or in South Africa or anywhere else, largely because the platform that you inherit at a particular point in time is what you would develop in order to establish UHC. So I think the environment in which you start off is based on what your historical platform was and how you plan to transform that. And so service delivery needs to be upmost in one's mind. Thereafter, I think human resources becomes critical. And here I think the challenge is often, do you have sufficiently skilled personnel to be able to do this? And the notion is always to inherit the norms and standards that are available in the West in order to deliver services. And that may not always be appropriate for a middle or lower income country to be able to deliver services based on the skills mix that one would have in the US or in Europe, but rather to define a skills mix based on a certain cadre of workers. So I'm talking here about things like task shifting. So rather than having a medical doctor, you could have what's referred to as a medical associate who's trained for a shorter period of time, is able to deliver certain services, not everything, and then refer those more highly skilled tasks to other persons. I think it's easier to deliver universal health coverage in that way than trying to skill everyone up to the level that norms and standards would define in the West, for example. I think that's one mistake we've made, is try to achieve those norms and standards. It takes very long to do it, and in the meanwhile, what happens? And so you have the population are waiting for service delivery who don't get it because you say, well, we're delivering these human resources, and guess what? Once they're trained, you're actually training for export. They then leave to many other countries where it's far more attractive financially for them. Then the other area is clearly medicines and equipment. And here I think I heard your Prime Minister very clearly indicating that being able to produce medicines and equipment locally is critical. Much of the health technology that's available is unaffordable in many cases. And so being able to develop the skills locally to being able to produce this is also critical. India is currently, one would say, the supplier of the world in terms of generic medicines, and so it's done a great job in that area. And now moving on to equipment is another area that clearly I think one needs to look at and see how that can best be done. On the financing front, I think the challenge is really how do you get a system going that's sustainable using taxation and other methods to be able to do it. In a low and middle income country, the approach is usually to try and protect the most vulnerable by having a tax-based financing system. And for those that are able to afford it, to have a user fee system that will able to finance that through private insurance or any other mechanism that one may decide to put together. I think finally, very good information systems become critical because the health sector is dynamic, and one needs to respond to that dynamism by being able to have information that's readily available at all times, and being able to review that from time to time, to be able to adjust the program, to check whether you're actually achieving the goal or you're making a dent in terms of the disease burden of the country. And so being able to have a robust information system is critical to be able to do that.
Excellent. I think you made some very interesting point that we need clarity of goals, we need leadership commitment, we need good governance, we need service delivery as a high priority, indigenize local standards, local production, innovative financing. Most important thing I picked up, what you said, which I'm going to pass on the next question, is about human resources. See, on one side we keep saying that finances are an issue, but the fact is it's the human resources who utilize the finances, and the history is not necessarily the way they should be. I'm going to put on to Ashok, who is with IHMR and John Hopkins. What do you think should be done by the government in terms of medical and paramedical professionals, healthcare workers, and also what role can private sector play in terms of assisting the government to roll out the universal health coverage?
Thank you, Rajendra. I think it's not the government or the private sector. It's a matter of quality. I think there's enough, except for doctors or specialists, enough manpower available in this country. And I find there are a huge number of nurses, so-called technicians and others are available. But the quality is always a big issue. It is the important thing is to bring in the quality. And secondly, I believe that besides the technical manpower, we also require a lot of managerial manpower. I come from an institution which trains people how to manage hospitals and healthcare institutions. And I believe that the management is much lacking in this country. Our graduates are mostly lapped up by the private sector, hospitals and private sector healthcare facilities, and lesser by the government. I have an exception here of Gujarat government. Not that it's a flavor of the season that I'm talking about, but the reality is Mr. Narendra Modi, when he was the Chief Minister in Gujarat, he went to Junagadh Hospital. It's a government hospital, a 100-year-old building. And there, one of our graduates was hospital in charge, and she could bring effective change in the whole hospital system, right from the sweepers to the nurses to the doctors. They were all with her, to bring about a versatile change. The kind of systems that she learned in interning in some of your hospitals or your hospitals, she put those systems there, and it worked. It worked so much so that she was able to get about a few crores of rupees from the public and the government to invest in the hospital. And finally, when Mr. Modi came in and saw the hospital, and it's a long story, he felicitated her and told in that public meeting that if I ever get sick, I should be brought here. Now, I'm trying to say this, that it is not impossible to bring a change in the government setup, provided you provide a certain level of free hand in management. And Gujarat government has been coming to us for about last 10, 12 years, and they would recruit people. And if you know that in NRHM, sir, Gujarat is among the leading states in the country. And many other states are also now getting managers, not only from IHMR, but from TES, from many other similar institutions. So I believe that the management is very important. And I don't want to differentiate between government or the private sector, because I do think a lot of people in the government sector are very, very efficient. And I never forget, the government is dealing with huge numbers. The numbers, and still the kind of people that go to the government is also always overcrowded. So we cannot deny that in the system the government is working in, we have to find better quality interventions. I'll limit myself to this one.
Thanks. I think you made a key point that quality is an issue. I think overall, all of us who have worked in different sectors have felt that on one side we talk about unemployment, other side we talk about number of graduates, but when you come to right skill sets, we really have to get them on board, spend money to train them, and finally what you figure out is still not of that level. So quality of the output that comes out of that is going to be the key. So I would now logically progress to Amira. She is at the helm of a leading diagnostic lab. Right diagnosis is the key to right treatment. The fact is it really happening? What would you give as inputs, at this point in time when we are in the midst of framing our health policy, in terms of what should be done with this sector, what is the role the private sector can play in terms of mass screenings, in terms of secondary prevention, more specifically, and any other inputs that you have from the sector?
Thanks. I think the government has a lot to do in healthcare in India. I think clearly we all know there are lots of problems, and we need to prioritize as to what can be done in the short term and what can be done in the long term. If I was to look at healthcare in general, I would look at sort of 5 C's of things, challenges that need to be overcome. One is cost, because I think today cost has become a huge issue for Indians in healthcare generally. Second is corruption. I think there is a lot of leakage in the system. And I think another 30-40% I would estimate the cost could be reduced if we were able to actually remove the leakages from the system. Third, I would say, is compliance in terms of regulatory framework, putting minimum standards, getting people to adhere and enforce those standards. Other things like connectivity and making sure we're providing access to people. And last, of course, focus on consumer. I think today in this whole healthcare piece, the patient has actually become the least important person. The most important person today is the doctor, and the patient has become sort of just the end consumer of it, but not really the focus in healthcare. And I think somewhere to bring back the logical focus of where healthcare should be, the consumer rights and consumer area to focus on them needs to be very important for us. I think it really depends on what role government is going to play. And I think that's the first key thing I think government needs to decide going forward. Are they really going to continue to be a provider? And frankly, as he said, the numbers that are there in India, it's not possible. So, is there a possibility of government moving from being a provider just to a payer? There are enough private healthcare companies who could come in and be providers at a certain quality with a certain accountability. The other question is going to be is what is going to be the role of the central healthcare system, central healthcare government versus the state government? Is the central team again going to do mass screenings and prevention across the country? Frankly, if you ask me, not possible. I think they just need to set benchmarks, they need to set guidelines for states. And considering we have different governments in different states, I think we need to give them flexibility to be able to design their own healthcare for their state depending on their needs. But they have to be accountable to the central government in terms of what the outcomes are. So I would actually personally like to see the central health government become more of a person who writes policies, benchmarks, templates for P2P, design things, and then becomes an enforcer, gives the liberty to the state governments to do things the way they want to do, with an agreement on what the targets are, and then become an enforcer to ensure which state government is not performing or is performing. But for this to happen, healthcare needs to become an electoral issue. Today, where does healthcare play a role at all when a state government is being voted in? There's just no role. People only talk roti, kapda, makan. We need to add sehat somewhere to the whole thing. So somewhere, if health doesn't become an electoral issue, I don't think it gets the importance that it probably needs. The reason the UK and whatever we say about the NHS, the level of quality of service is incredibly high for the number of people they're providing it. And the only reason is because it is an electoral issue in the UK. Every time a government is being voted in, people are watching what they've done from a health perspective. I think when you talk specifically about diagnostics, I think there are lots of challenges, but I think the main ones that I would sort of talk about would be today there are labs in India, and probably, we don't know how many labs there are in India. There's a constant guessing game every time, newspapers ask us what is the market size, what are the number of labs. Honestly, the answer we give is all of that give random numbers because we don't know. The truth is there's no count. We estimate that 99.9% of them are not accredited. There's no minimum standard. Today a lab could perform a test, or today a lab could not perform a test. There is nobody checking. You're free to give whatever result you want, and there is zero enforcement. If the benchmark or the platform, the playing field itself is unequal, you cannot do anything from there. So the first thing is we need to equalize the playing field and make everybody accountable for certain minimum standards. So I would say that's the first thing. The second thing I would say would be today health insurance has become a channel to provide access to people who are not able to afford it, or it's not at least bankrupting people when they need healthcare. Today that's true for treatment inside hospitals. It's not true for diagnostics at all. So if you're not hospitalized and you're just an OPD patient and you go to a doctor and you need diagnostics, you are down by a few thousand rupees on an average because your insurance doesn't cover it. So when is health insurance going to start covering OPD diagnostics? Because that is going to mean that people are not overdiagnosed and people are not underdiagnosed, because that's what's happening today. A third thing I would say is, talking about lowering costs by removing this corruption that I talked about earlier and removing unnecessary taxation. There are a lot of places today in healthcare and diagnostics where, we import pretty much everything, right? We import all chemicals, all reagents, all equipments, because there is no indigenous manufacturing. And we pay, pretty hefty sort of taxes on all of that to the government. If we are trying to make healthcare more affordable, are those certain taxes that can be removed? Could we instead, like we're paying an education cess, could we pay a healthcare cess? And then clean up all the in-between taxes and make healthcare financing a little bit more transparent. Last, I would say is, everything goes back to the source. And as we know, we've talked a lot about medical education in India and how medical education, when kids are going to medical school, are landing up paying ridiculous, hefty donations to get into medical school. If they're going to do that, when they come out and as doctors, they can't charge a market price. I mean, most doctors are charging 500 rupees or 700 rupees as a consulting fee in cities in India. Can they recover their cost that they've invested in medical education? Very unlikely. And that's a large part of what leads to the corruption as well. So can we go to the source? Can we fix some of the medical education issues? And lastly, if the government can create a template for PPPs, because I know every time any of us have talked about the great PPP with state governments or central, we keep getting pushed back and forth like a ping pong ball. You know, the state will say go to the center will say go to the state. If the center can just design a PPP template, this is how it can work, and give it to the states, I think then the states should be able to implement it, because there's a logic on how they can actually design it. Those are just some of the things, but I don't want to block any more time. There are lots more, but we'll start with those.
Thanks, Amira, firstly for putting the key thing. The entire healthcare system is built for the patient, but is nowhere into it. And then finally putting in those 5 C's of cost, corruption, compliance, connectivity, and consumers. So very well put. Financing, at the end of it, accountability has to be there. Over to Vaidesh. We know pharmaceuticals account for almost like 70, 72, any number that we can figure out for out-of-patient pocket spending. And Vaidesh, you have been a voice of the industry for many years. You have been banging your head, I hope not more. What do you think would be the pharma industry's input in terms of the government talking about free medicines and diagnostics under the health assurance? And what role would they play? I mean, do you see any discussions happening from the industry saying this is what we could do for the government? What's your view?
Thanks, Rajendra. Yeah, the first and foremost, I think more than the pharmaceutical industry, echo your point, India is the only place where we have a healthcare retailing, where a patient individually goes and buys, consumes at a stage when this person is in a compromised state. Mentally, emotionally, physically is in a compromised state, he's going and buying something. This is the only country where you are, and you call that as an out of pocket. So what do you think is happening is, people are buying like how they buy things which, if you buy a sari, that's okay, you know something about it, but you're going and buying in healthcare, you don't have a clue about it, and going and negotiating and saying, give me hernia operation in 5,000 rupees, so it can get done. So the biggest problem right now is that I think we don't even have a system. Fundamental underpinning of a healthcare system need to first get in before even talking about other pharma industry or other providers, other playmakers in this. If you don't put a standard treatment protocol and guidelines, which gets passed down, implemented, make sure everybody knows what is the standard treatment protocol, then you have an ability to aggregate demand. Today, if you don't aggregate demand, you don't get cost reduction. If you're going to buy, today the power is in the hands of the various people who are providing delivery of services to the patient, because this person is buying individually. So obviously the cost is not going to be, the person doesn't have the power. The first thing is to aggregate your demand. How do you do the aggregate demand? First and foremost, you need to put a system in place, have standard treatment protocol, establish a patient care pathway, which somebody need to ensure the patient care pathway is done. Why somebody who's got a headache has to come to All India Institute of Medical Science to get a treatment and block people who have come there for other medicine, other big treatment to be done. So first and foremost, you need to remove the inefficiency in the system. That itself will remove 30% of your cost. So frankly, in my opinion, as an industry, I think there is a huge attempt to figure out how to support government. For example, in the area of tuberculosis, whether it's HIV, whether it's on the public health space, I think the industry is working with the government to figure out how to give these drugs at a really throwaway prices. You must have heard about a lot of news that has happened. But what is very important is that if you're looking at some innovative drugs that has to come into this country, unless otherwise you have a system in place, you will never be able to gain an access to those innovative drugs. And rather than, we will all take an aggressive stand of going and repealing IPs, right? Going and saying that I'm going to break the IP because I can't afford. Now that is a very wrong way of looking at it. Instead, first get your system in place. After that, come and negotiate with the industry, right? Put a process in place. You have 60% of healthcare providers are in private, right? Each one of them have a different varying standards. So we don't even have a classification of the standards of which hospital, what quality of outcome that they are going to provide. So if I had to sum it up, I think we need to first get our fundamental underpinning in place, get your standard treatment protocol in place, accreditation in place, calibrate these providers based on the outcomes, which I'm quite sure that everybody has what it takes to provide those outcomes, so that you don't have this fly-by-night operators providing healthcare and actually leading up to, there are patients who get caught up in the whole patient care pathway. I remember I've done some study on this. Somebody goes for piles, ending up in a rectal cancer, right? That happens in 3 years' time. Somebody holds this patient, giving all kinds of rubbish treatment, right? And then he or she makes the necessary funding out of that patient, and finally that person goes to the real provider, and then they're saying, I have only 20 rupees to care for my cancer. What do you think that somebody is going to you? See, you and me will never be able to answer those problems unless the fundamental underpinnings are sorted out. So that's, as an industry, I think there's always supportive of figuring out how to support government, but we need to get this thing resolved first.
Thanks, Vaidesh. I think a very clear message about starting first with protocols and guidelines, so is also not much of use and overabuse of medicines. Nikunj probably knows pretty well that we have already a process underway for protocols and guidelines within the government. But I think going forward, we'll have to see both the sides approaching each other with a mindset to say, hey, look, we are not working as private and public, but it's the patient for which we are working, and that's the end goal. Great. Thanks. Sangeeta, you have been driving strategic initiatives, looking at innovative ways to serve the healthcare in this country, and Apollo was the first that corporatized healthcare. And in the new scheme of things, a lot of things are being talked about. So where do you see the role of private sector hospitals like Apollo and the Max and the Fortis working with the patient, with the government? Do you see a change in approach from the private sector or from the government? What are your inputs? Where do you see at this point in time where we are talking of, look, it's going to be right to health? So do you see a issue where we will have a lot of legal issues over time? How does private sector see this as a right to health? And what's your input?
So first, clearly, it's an extremely exciting time because when we created our first infrastructure, we did it with every category of bed, from a general ward to a semi-private to a deluxe room to a suite. We treated the Indian farmer, we treated the President of India. So our facilities were reflective of the Indian demography. But it's a very painful journey to be able to find affordability and accessibility to those people, and the enablement of that, which has actually been happening in stages. I mean, in South India, say Andhra Pradesh, healthcare is indeed an election issue. Chief ministers have won based on their healthcare initiatives, and we do have some level of universal coverage. But in this process or the journey, I think a few things are important to remember. One is that we need to move much faster. We need to be far more comprehensive. We need to think holistically about this scenario. And when I say holistic, I want to actually take 3 steps back. Sitting in this square room with a round table and people all around reminds me of when we were at World Economic Forum. And the group, actually, Raj was there also, but we were among the thought leaders of that group because we gave the group one simple concept, which is the beginning of the whole issue of who is responsible for healthcare. So it used to be that the doctor was responsible, then we said the government's responsible, but the fact is that society is responsible for healthcare. And when we bring healthcare center stage and say society is responsible, from wellness to preventive care to teaching healthcare in schools to legislating about the kind of food and pollution which is happening in our country, to zoning for health facilities, partnership, it's a whole spectrum. And this is the time to rethink at another level. So the first thing I really want to say is that I think Apollo feels that we can play a role in what I would call thought leadership. 30 years ago, we pioneered one model. I think it's time to re-pioneer a whole new model which looks at product innovation. What are our products? Whether it's guidelines, cost effectiveness, what goes into it, appropriateness of care, removing corruption. So there's a product innovation piece. There's an entire process innovation piece. Why does private health sector do open heart surgery or have an average hour loss of 3 to 4 days, whereas other facilities doing similar case mixes looking at 10 and 11 days? So there's an entire process innovation in terms of referral, like you referred to the AIMS and the telemedicine. So appropriateness of care, process of looking at care, when do you get what care. There's one whole spectrum across process innovation. Then there's the entire scenario of price innovation. Because I think the factor today in India is not that care is not available, it's that we haven't got the pricing right to ensure that we can sustain and continue quality care. So putting quality at the center and then talking price is really where one aspect of this whole journey goes. And then I think we also need to look at the whole partnership innovation, because this, like Amira said, we've all spoken PPP, but we haven't done PPP in the way. And so putting health in the societal context and then looking at what is the partnership we can do. So very simplistically, I mean, at an easy level, I can say what, when you ask directly to the question, what can Apollo do? Of course, we can share our infrastructure and find ways to work to support the vision of care. Second, we can look at, which I think is very important, is skills and manpower training. On our 25th anniversary, when we reviewed the bypass surgery and the heart program, we found that not only had we done 140,000 heart surgeries, but of the 200 odd credible heart surgery programs in the country, almost 76% of them had people who had been trained at an Apollo. So I think skills training from the highest to the basic nursing care to reinventing training. We continue to train nurses by poking patients. I mean, that's, there's simulation, there's e-learning, there's apprenticeship training, there's certification. We have to rethink our whole training and skills development cycle. So I think Apollo has a role to play in that one, because it is unfair for us to keep 45% of our medical college graduates out of a postgraduate program. You're telling them about after 5 years of work that you're a failure in life, you couldn't get a PG seat. It's unfair, it's not human. We need to rethink that scenario as well. So there's the infrastructure sharing, there's the skills training, there's the thought leadership aspect about across a range of things, from his robotic care, robotic surgery that we do, and is it relevant to care pathways, to primary care, to point of care. So there's a thought leadership sharing. And then finally, I think it's inappropriate to actually close this sharing aspect by losing an opportunity to look at what can we do differently in the country. And so there's the whole space of sharing data, research, crowdsourcing solutions, and finding new solutions for Indian healthcare. And I think we're uniquely positioned. We did a very simple one, clopidogrel resting test. We took the cardiac data available at Apollo and shared it with a group of young scientists. We came out with a new biomarker in 6 months, which is 1/10 the cost of the global biomarkers. This is a tiny, we're a speck in the ocean compared to Indian healthcare. How can we accelerate the discovery process as well as, whether it's the manufacturing, because we're smartly reinventing the entire back end of the cycle. So the potential to share is enormous. There are the easy wins, there's the medium term, and there's the long term visioning, which I think is really the crux of it. If we share this common vision, then our ability to interplay and complement each other rather than competing or looking at distinct aspects. And ultimately, I think anything we talk about will ultimately be successful if we use the new age world to empower the individual first, to stay healthier, access healthcare right at the right point of time. So India doesn't see all our cancers in stage 3 and stage 4. We do, 5 stenting instead of seeing that person when he had a high cholesterol or a single vessel block. I want to see people at the right stage. We want to be able to use medicines and reverse a stroke because they came to the emergency room on time. So when you put the consumer at the center of healthcare, empower him with knowledge, create a partnering environment so that everybody works together, you will not only improve the quality of care, but you'll actually radically bring down the burden of disease. And that's the opportunity we have on hand now when we're rethinking differently. So lots to be done, and happy to do it.
Thanks. Now we came from Amira's 5C of cost, corruption, compliance, connected to 4Ps: price, partnership, innovation, product, and price. See, that's woman power. That's woman power. So back to Shivinder. You started Fortes around a decade back, and today is the fastest growing tertiary care. And if one thing is done well in India, that's tertiary care. Now, given your experience in pharmaceuticals and driving probably the most innovative pharma company and then a hospital chain, uh, where do you think and what do you think India should do in terms of taking the primary and secondary care to that level where today tertiary care is there? I mean, what is your input to that, and what role can private sector play in primary care? The new health policy envisages a complete different dimension to primary care. It's not just primary care as primary care per se. It's going to be chronic disease management, rest of the things in primary care as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Raj. I think firstly, I'm not going to be able to come out with 3 Zs. I don't have women power supporting me. But a lot of what you're talking about actually is covered, but what Amira and Sangeeta have talked about. It's not an issue of whether tertiary care has gotten to the level that it has and primary, secondary hasn't. I think Sangeeta addressed it very eloquently to say that the reason why tertiary care is there today is because people come and you don't have a choice. So it has to develop. Because if somebody comes to your ER and has a heart attack, then you kind of build a system around that. And unfortunately, in our country, people don't go early on in the game. And a bit of this I talked about in the larger plenary, so I don't want to repeat it. But if you just look at some of the, and I'll talk about why, but I'm not, there is a reason for that. But if you just look at what some of the way we behave as a society, we don't take health as our problem. It's not our responsibility. When I fall sick, I think even Vedish mentioned, it's the somebody else is supposed to take care of it. Whether it's the government, and if it's a private sector should be paying for it as well. There's so much of what we see today that you come with a medical problem. And you say, but you should be doing it for free. So it's not only did I not take care of myself in an the situation, but it's also not my problem to even take care of it going forward. So I think we generally don't, as a society, give importance to health. And the example I took in the plenary just now, and I'll say it again, and I've seen this happen time and again. We are very touchy about our cars. A little small scratch, dent, a little noise, we run to the workshop, get it sorted out, and so on and so forth. Every one of us in this room, for sure, and every one of us outside, has woken up someday with a back pain, with a shoulder pain, with a crick in the neck. What do? We either ignore it, or pop a pill and get back to work. We never ever take care of that. Now it could just be a crick in the neck, and that's fine. It could be something much more significant, and it'll last for a while, then you get used to it. You never drive a car with your wheel wobbling. You won't do it for more than an hour. We can do this for months and we get used to it also. It's okay. We actually take care of a lot of other things in our life much more than we take care of our health. And therefore, primary and secondary are not going to develop that much. It's not a function of whether there's ability to do so or not. It's an attitude. Amira talked about diagnostics. I'll just take touch on that. And I think it comes back to primary, secondary care. We have a very conflicting environment today, and the society has changed. So I think the expectations have changed. If you think 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when you used to go to a doctor, he probably held your hand, checked your pulse, told you exactly what is wrong with you, prescribed a prescription for a medicine or whatever, and you get on with it. And you kind of get on with life and not worry about it. Today you have counter problems in your market today. If a doctor was to meet you, hear your story, check you out, and tell you what's wrong with you and go away, you turn out to say the doctor is useless. How does he know I have this problem? He just told me I have a cardiac issue or a cancer or something. How does he know? So he wants evidence to say you do a diagnostic for me and so on and so forth. And probably right, because at the end of the day, you can be right 90% of the time, 95% of the time, and you can't take a chance in some of these critical diseases. On the other hand, you get to a doc, he checks you out and says you could have 5 problems, and I'm going to eliminate by virtue of my process that Vedish talked about. And the guy says he does overdiagnosis. He's made me do 20 battery of tests, X-ray, CT scan, MRI, PET CT, etc., etc. The guy is milking money off me. And then if the guy happens to make the mistake of asking you if you can afford it, and he'll ask you whether you're going to pay yourself or your insurance or whatever, he'll say, different treatment for different people. But the fact of the matter is, you look at a physician's point of view. If he sees a poor man come into the door, he knows he can't afford to get a CT scan done. He will take his best judgment and tell him what to do. And if he is generally prone to not doing overdiagnosis or over-treatment, he will do that. You don't trust him and go somewhere else and get 3 more tests done and say, oh, this guy's a better doctor. You're proliferating the fact that people should be doing that. And then you get a bad name because you're doing overdiagnosis. Because patients want to know. So there's a class of people who will go with a prescription, the class of people who will hound you till you show them enough, and so on and so forth. So we don't catch it early. We don't take care of ourselves. And then we push it as far as we can for chronic to become acute, and then we go and get whatever need to be done. And then there's a cyclical problem. So I think what all three have mentioned, I think we need to look at how are we structured in healthcare. And we are structured in healthcare, like Amira talked about insurance. We are structured in healthcare to take care of you when you're IP, when you're inpatient. So the guy turns around and says, you know, I've got a problem today, it's okay, I'll wait. If it gets taken care of, fine. If not, I'll go get a surgery done and somebody else will pay for it. So the paying for it is more important than fixing it now, even though I have to pay out of my own pocket. And we procrastinate. You know, we anyway don't have good lifestyles, I would say, healthy lifestyles. I'm sure today's lunch will be a good demonstration of what is good lifestyle for us. We'll spend the whole day in a conference room. We'll spend the whole day in a conference room sitting down doing nothing much except for walk to the washroom and then go and have a nice hefty lunch, come back and sit, and then a year later get a heart attack and say, "Pata nahi kaise hua." So I think we have an issue around the structure of the organ. If our society was structured to do more preventive, you talked about pollution, structure to actually take care of the environment and therefore go out and make walkways and stuff like that, we will have a lot more primary care, we'll have a lot more preventive, and our primary secondary systems will develop. I think competence-wise, you talked about the whole talent skill side. I think we have huge competence. We don't have enough of it. I think not only I'm talking about healthcare, but I'm talking about just building ecosystems in our country. We have huge competence to do that. But there has to be an environment that actually wants you to get to that level as well. And I don't think we lack that.
Thanks, Ravindra. You made a very interesting point that no matter what, at the end of the day, it is the delayed approach towards health when you say, okay, now it is broken, I need to go. So question is, how do we address that issue? Do we make regular routine checks compulsory to entitle healthcare? Maybe that's one other way to go. Or incentivize good health, I think, which is being considered. If we take that approach, maybe to some extent we'll be able to. I think people will still find a way to figure out how to escape that system. But that's a very interesting and very important point if we really want to develop a good primary care system. We have, yeah.
Just you raise a thought. A few years after we started, we realized that preventive was not happening. So we in our organization, our top team, you probably relate to that. We actually told everybody that we will not give it increments at the end of the year. All our top 10 or 12 managers get a health check done. So in March, we just did a review to see who had done it. Only 2 of the 11 people had done that. So in the meeting, I asked, I said, what happened? He said, no, we can't go. It's too much work. You give us a holiday, then we'll go.
Okay. We have an answer also.
You know, they don't want to use a holiday of their account or whatever you want to call it to get their own health taken care of. They want company time to go. And this is, I'm talking 10, 12 years ago.
That's the
so, yeah, that's also the case. I'm saying you're finding an excuse or the other to not go. I mean, here you're in a healthcare organization, unfortunately. You get it for free. It's part of your perk. But you take a half day off or whatever the case is, and even still you don't want to go. I mean, this is like, and that's just symbolic of what we do. So you have to find incentive to get a guy to go get his health check done.
Correct. I think a lot of home care companies would be smiling at this. You know, we have limits of time, but we have 2 important speakers to talk about. We have Arvind, who is from UP. Uttar Pradesh, as you know, is the largest state, and 6 states, if we pick up, constitute 42% of India's population. Now, given the way our healthcare system operates, would you be doing differently to make the health assurance successful, or the other way around? Should health be given a budget, like states like UP should be given a budget and say, you have no commitments to roll out national programs, you do your own programs based on the complexities, demographics and all. Would that approach be something that you'll be happy as a health secretary, or would you be doing something differently?
No. See, firstly, I like to dwell on 3 key aspects of health assurance. See, one is ensuring accessibility of the healthcare services. The second is affordability, and the third is the quality. So once we are able to deal with all the 3 issues, then only we can go for a right to health as it is. And still, I think we are a long way to be able to ensure all these 3 things. Now, one of the issues which you raised, and that is whether the states are getting enough flexibility, and this was also the issue raised by some of the other speakers. I think the National Health Mission and the way it has been structured has been based on giving a lot of freedom to the states. The states are required to prepare district action plans, and based on the gap analysis which they feel is basically required for improving their health services in terms of infrastructure, in terms of quality, in terms of delivery of medicines, etc. And based on that plan only, which is submitted to the central, the approvals from the central government is coming. That is one aspect of the story. And with the coming of the National Health Mission, a lot of funding has come to the states. And if you go to the states, there's a lot of improvement which has taken place now. I mean, in UP, if you look at the state budget also, there has been an increase of about 30% in the state budget over the last year. And of about 5% of the state budget I am spending on health, which is quite a substantial increase from the earlier times when the budgetary expenses used to be below 1%. So one of the other issues which was also mentioned was whether there is a political will. I mean, fortunately, in our state, the manifesto itself says that all the medical services which we are providing through hospitals are to be done on a free of cost basis. So we are providing medicines free of cost. We are providing diagnostics free of cost. There is absolutely no out of pocket. And the problem becomes complicated the moment you switch over to specialists, because retaining them in the health side is a very critical issue. I mean, just to give you an idea, I have a sanctioned strength of doctors of about 15,000 doctors. And I am still, I mean, despite doing so much of recruitment drives, etc., I am able to retain only 12,000 doctors, and still there are 3,000 vacancies. So the state governments, and especially in UP, we have tried to incentivize how to retain the medical doctors there. Because one of the key issues of providing health assurance is you should first have the doctor available in your PSCs and the CSCs. And then only you can talk about giving them free medicines or giving them free treatment. So getting the medical staff has been a key issue with the governments. We have recently now switched over to a times-bound promotions of the doctors. I mean, earlier there used to be a grievance that the promotion ladder is so structured that they do not have enough promotion opportunities. But now the state government recently, about 3 months ago, have come up with a policy structure whereby time-bound promotions will be given to the doctors. But that seems to be not an incentive enough for the doctors to still come in, and they want something more which the public health network is not able to provide. I mean, that much of a so I think this is a very key area for the policymakers to think about how to get the manpower. And this is where we will have to partner with the private sector and bring in their expertise wherever it is not available with me. In UP, we have been able to come up with a public-private partnership policy. There was a suggestion by Amira that you should at least have templates for entering into private partnerships. So firstly, we have identified the areas, and the areas basically are in terms of quality, which you can provide, in terms of tertiary care, which generally is not available in the public health network, in terms of outsourcing of services, I mean, even routine services like cleaning and gardening, like diagnostic services, in which I am not able to provide the quality which is supposed to be provided to the beneficiaries. So these are areas in which I need to partner with the private sector. And Sangeeta mentioned about training and the skill which needs to be, which again is an area in which we can partner with the private sector. And they can bring in their expertise, because a lot of skill upgradation is also required of the medical and paramedical staff, which I have with my network. So I think there are a number of areas in which we can enter into partnerships with private sector. One of the things which I would like to mention also is about the health insurance policies, I mean, which need to be brought about. One of the policies which have been under implementation is the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana. But the experience of the government with the insurance companies has not been good, because insurance companies are looking for a commercial kind of a partnership, and they want to make money out of it. And obviously any commercial venture will like to make money out of it. they will be, the experience of the government has not been good, and therefore now we are migrating from an insurance-based model to basically a model in which there is a society or a trust or a state government agency which directly empanels hospitals, and through them and without any intermediary or an insurance company, we are able to hire their services. So firstly, we will basically, the primary care we intend to provide through our hospitals. Wherever there is a need of secondary and tertiary care which is not available with the government hospitals, obviously a CGHS kind of model can be developed, wherein a partnership can be developed with the private sector who have the capability and wherewithal to deliver those kind of services, and terms and conditions can be engaged. Right? I'll like to, these initial words I like to begin.
Yeah. Thanks, Arvind. I think you put it very succinctly. You know that private sector has a definite role to play. Right. As long as you know that you are clear about the goals and you have a roadmap, you know how to engage them. I have two speakers. We have limitation of time, but you know, Sanjeev, 26 years ago, you were transforming a PSU, Modern Food Industries, and that was the, I think, a record you set as the youngest PSU CEO, which is not going to be broken. Now, given your experience of working in the PSU and you know how tough it is to turn around a PSU, our situation is not any different. Now, reflecting back, if you were to, you know, tell what should the government do to transform healthcare as we're looking at reforms, what would those key action areas be from your perspective?
Thanks, Rajendra. 26 years ago, India had bread price control. And it wasn't possible to make good bread in this country. We begged the Planning Commission, we begged the Prime Minister, the price control was removed. And today you have the best bread that any country has available in India. The easiest way to kill any industry is to impose a price control. I think if Prime Minister really meant that this forum needs to deliver strong messages in terms of policy reforms that need to be taken to get India to a 20 trillion dream figure, we need to move away from the culture of controlling prices. Drug industry, healthcare industry cannot afford price control. Market is the best settler of any pricing mechanism. So that's the first point. The second point is health is a state subject. Despite best intentions, it has been impossible to have policy unification. If we really want to deliver strong healthcare outcomes, my recommendation would be that the health is moved to the concurrent list. Because in terms of, we were an international community now. Ebola breaks out in one part of the world, it could show up in Kakinada, it could show up in Kanpur, it could show up in Karnal. And it's impossible for a state to manage the healthcare defense systems without the intervention, active intervention of the central systems. So if we have, and again, the central laboratories are all in the central system, and their writ does not really run on the state system. So if we move health from the state list to the concurrent list, I think we would do a great favor in terms of achieving our health outcomes. The third thing which needs to happen very clearly is the cooperation that everybody has mentioned between public sector, private sector, and if I may add one more P, its flavor to have alphabets, and that is philanthropy. The philanthropy sector is a huge sector that is impacting worldwide delivery of healthcare. Now this could be Gates Foundation, it could be a Clinton Foundation, an Apollo Foundation, a Fortis Foundation, anything. But the presence of a neutral umpire in between the public sector and the private sector lends credibility, legitimacy, and therefore, if we bring in the philanthropy and the philanthropic credible NGOs into the process of healthcare delivery, we would do well. Last year, Public Health Foundation of India was the largest recipient of donations in the NGO sector. People are willing to give if they find that there is a credible vehicle available, and they can play a phenomenal role in delivering healthcare. Secretary mentioned about a very important point. The desire is to provide free healthcare services. Free to the user doesn't mean they are free to the taxpayer. When the state is delivering, and Sangeeta and I had a long dialogue in the forums of FICCI, we actually found the healthcare delivery cost in the state sector is higher than the healthcare delivery cost in the private sector. So when the state likes to believe that it is delivering free healthcare services, actually it is doing at a higher cost than would be delivered by a private sector system. So therefore, the public sector and private sector need to come together, because end of the day, the GDP is not about free, the GDP is about the real value which is getting delivered. So the mistrust that exists between the public sector and the private sector in the healthcare, that glue needs to change to trust. Today, what you rightly mentioned, 70% of India's healthcare delivery happens in the private sector. So you cannot have effective healthcare solutions without private sector playing a very significant role in providing high quality, efficient services on behalf of the state, with the state, and in partnership with state. I think it is also important not to lose sight of the fact that we have a huge medical tradition in this country from the Ayush stream. We need to have an integrative health policy. Prime Minister has been very far-sighted in making an Ayush ministry. We have 750,000 registered practitioners on the Ayush side and 850,000 on the modern medicine side. So if we are adding 5,000 new diabetics in our country every day, and we ignore the outreach potential of 750,000 doctors in battling the primary and the secondary healthcare systems where the integrative model could work very successfully, I think we should take that into cognizance. We ought to remember that if any problem has to be solved, we need to go to the root. Today we talk of the scourge of corruption that Ameera mentioned, the referrals that are rampant in the healthcare industry. Well, it is clear that if you have to pay several crore rupees to get a seat for a MD, a PG seat, then where is your return on capital going to come? If I may, through the portals of this round table, suggest the Olean model. There is an engineering college in Boston called Olean Engineering College that some of you would be very familiar with. Everybody is entitled to apply for admission. If you get admitted, for 5 years your education is free. You don't pay a cent. So if we can move to a system, in medicine there should be no reservation. No reservation at all. 67 years later, if we still want to live with reservation, we are not going to achieve a $20 trillion economy. Move the reservation away. Let's have a common entrance test. If you're bright enough to become a doctor, let it be the responsibility of the state to educate you free and reimburse to the private sector medical providers the cost of providing their education. Now, once you have given somebody a 7 years free education, you are surely within your right to say that please come and serve in rural India for the next 3-4 years before you go on to making into your bigger dreams of life. So I think it's so very important to do that. And last but not the least, it is extremely important that this voice, the wonderful views across around this table that have been expressed, are conveyed very correctly, impartially to our healthcare policy makers. I think we would have achieved come closer to achieving the goals of universal health coverage. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjeev. First assurance that it will reach the right people in the right manner and the right message. Very certainly you put those 5 points. On the concurrent list, I'll tell you till 1930s, health was actually a central subject, but because of the financial situation, Britishers put it to states, and we are continuing with it. But I can't comment beyond that. No. I'm just, just try to comment historical perspective of it. Now in the last speaker, Nikunja, the Joint Secretary, Ministry of Health. A lot of us have spoken and shared. So what are your things that you want to share with this round table? And if you have anything special to share with this group.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. I think the... Yeah.
Budget, everything you can come to.
Only cap is he has only 3 minutes to speak.
Actually, the problem of being the last speaker is that whatever points you really jot down to tell, many people must have spoken about it. So that way I'm little handicapped. But let me tell you, I don't think any of the speakers really made a point that was not relevant to what we are discussing. And I am very sure that when these suggestions are going to come to the ministry, we are going to give a very, very serious thought to it. This is number one. Number two, I think let me also try to dispel the apprehension that the health ministry does not really want to work with the private sector, and whatever initiatives we are proposing to do, it is basically exclusive of the private sector. Let me tell you, this is a myth. And we are extremely proud of our private sector. We are extremely proud of some of the innovations, not only in the delivery of products and services, but also in the cost measures that you have been telling. And we really want to engage with the private sector in a very, very productive way. And this is another thing that I would like to tell you. But actually, we are really at a very exciting time, not only because whatever buzz is being created, not only in this room, because all of us are sitting here, but outside the room and maybe everywhere. Because I think when both Rajendra and I were in Philippines, Manila, a few days back, we were told that the world is only talking about two leaders, the Indian Prime Minister and the Indonesian President. So people are excited about India, like a lot of things are happening about India. So health cannot be really excluded from that excitement or that buzz. And I think most of the points have really been focused, but then I would like to bring another dimension to the issue. Actually, I shared that article with Rajendra yesterday. Basically, this is an article written by a professor of Stanford University. He tells that healthcare is going to undergo creative destruction in the coming years, and it is going to happen because of technology. The smartphone that we are going to use, that we are using, it is going to be our GP, the general practitioner. And then actually, I think we have to be all, both in the public sector as well as the private sector, have to be very aware of this, how to then make use of the technology to basically address a lot of issues, shortage of manpower, basically higher cost of care, a lot of things. I think we really need to work on that. And then I think one of the speakers really addressed about the approach of health in all. Actually, when I am in Delhi, I am having throat congestion, but when I go to my hometown Bhubaneswar, I really don't have. Most of the diseases that people in Delhi suffer is because of the environment in which we are living in. And hence, actually, safe driving, good public road engineering will save at least 100,000 lives every year. Good air quality is going to save much more lives than we can do. And availability of safe, potable drinking water in all our villages is going to save much more lives than basically 100% or 200% or 400% increase in the health budget of the center and the states. Actually, that's why I think basically there is need for collaboration across sectors, collaboration across both public, private, philanthropic, not-so-profit sectors. And actually, I think we have to create basically a innovation ecosystem in our country in the health sector. Actually, that is what is lacking. A lot of good things are happening in government. We could eradicate polio, which nobody could believe us. We have made excellent progress in reduction of infant mortality rate and the maternal mortality rate, though that does not really become the headline news, but it is one of the achievements over the last few years. And now we are having 20,000 ambulances on the road, and most of it through public-private partnership. And then within half an hour you can get an ambulance in your home. That is happening, and these are actually success stories, but then we really don't read about the stories very frequently. We have an excellent private sector, and one of our private sector hospitals conduct open heart surgery at 10% of the cost at which it is conducted in USA. And one of our eye care institutions, their delivery model is a case study in Harvard Business School. So we are, and similarly, and our generics are basically 70% of the generics are made in India. If Africa has been able to control AIDS epidemic, it is because of the generic medicines that is manufactured in India. 70% of one vaccine is made by only one farm in India. So actually we are all, the excellent things are happening everywhere. but actually we are not working as a team. That is really the ecosystem that is missing. I think the role of the central government in that case is going to be creating that ecosystem. And basically, that is the thing. And then regarding like technology, actually, I really don't have the time to talk more about it. But I think all the suggestions that have come on the table are going to receive the highest consideration of the ministry. And with this, I would again like to thank all of you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikunja. I think you made my life much easier. I had, in fact, 3 questions on technology, innovation, and environment. And I was wondering because I had a slip that said 10-12 minutes left. So, but you answered it. Thanks so much. I think we had an interesting panel, exciting discussions, and some very valuable inputs that have come out.